You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas.
Hi, welcome to this week's bonus episode of Mind Over Murder. For this particular episode, we bring you back to one of two episodes we recorded with Chloe Canter in December 2020. Chloe Canter is known as the co-host of the True Crime Twins podcast, which she records with her twin sister, as well as her participation in Crawl Space and Missing podcasts hosted by, of course, Lance Rinstierna and Tim Polari. We continue our conversation with Chloe discussing the work that she's done in the Brianna Maitland case. We hope you enjoy this bonus episode of Mind Over Murder, and as always, thanks for listening.
Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And this week we are continuing our coverage of the Brianna Maitland case with Chloe Canter of the True Crime Twins podcast and of Crawl Space. We are very much looking forward to continuing this coverage with her.
We just wanted to thank everybody for your ratings and reviews. Ratings and reviews, as Kristin has said here, make a significant difference for a podcast like ours in terms of growing our audience. And we wanted to thank a couple of folks this week that offered some really nice reviews. Barbie1121 wrote, "Addicted," 5 stars. "I was drawn to this podcast because I was familiar with the Virginia cases. I love listening to experts in cutting-edge technology. I look forward to every new episode, and I look forward to the day it is released," which is very kind. Thank you very much, Barbie.
Thank you.
Aussie JAC writes, "I love this podcast." Thank you, Aussie. "Great stories, interesting guests, and fabulous rapport between the presenters, who both have lovely voices."
Thank you. That's nice to hear.
It is. It's a pleasure to listen. Thank you, Aussie.
Thank you very much. We appreciate all those ratings and reviews.
We better work continuing to get along just fine.
Seriously.
Because apparently, what is it? We have fabulous rapport.
After all these years, we still got it.
Yeah, I guess. Thank you. And we really appreciate the ratings and reviews and your ongoing support. Joining us today is Chloe Canter of the True Crime Twins podcast. She's also been an active blogger and podcaster with our friends from Crawl Space, Tim and Lance, and she's done a great deal of coverage on the Brianna Maitland case. So welcome, Chloe.
Thank you very much for having me.
Why don't you go ahead and start by telling us a little bit about yourself and about your background, Chloe?
Sure. So I started with Tim and Lance when they started their show Crawl Space. I was a listener of Missing Maura Murray, and we worked on Crawl Space together. And the first case that we covered was Brianna Maitland. That was a case that I was familiar with just from being an avid follower of true crime media. My educational and professional background was relevant in my interest. I have my degree in psychology. I just got my grad cert in criminology, and I was working as a psych counselor at the time. Thought a lot about these cases from that perspective, and when I got the opportunity to incorporate new media into that through Tim and Lance, I then started to blog as well. I just had a head overflowing with thoughts and ideas about the case and started writing them down, and then the blog just came naturally.
We've both enjoyed your blogging immensely. Kristin, what were you saying about the blog this morning when we were chatting?
I said it's very cogent written reporting, and it actually helped me get a handle on the intricacies of this case for really the first time since we started doing research, because there is so much to it, and there are so many different rabbit holes that you can go down and so many names. And it wasn't until I read all of your blog posts that I was like, oh, I finally have a handle on this. This is so good for me. Your reporting was excellent. And thank you so much for taking the time to do that.
Oh, I really appreciate you saying that. My goal was definitely to be concise and comprehensive. And it is a really convoluted case where rumor is rampant and the waters have been muddied. So that's a big goal of the blog, is to clarify as much as I possibly can from where I'm sitting.
Take us back to 2004. We have two young women, Maura Murray, and then almost immediately followed, am I correct, by Brianna Maitland? Do I have my sequence right?
Yes, Brianna Maitland went missing a few weeks after Maura Murray did, and 90 miles away.
So we're talking about initially Maura Murray going missing, at least starting at the University of Massachusetts, which is my alma mater, and then disappearing in New Hampshire 90 miles away, and a few weeks later, Brianna Maitland goes missing. So were you initially interested in the Maura Murray case? You live in Western Massachusetts. Were you following these things from a regional interest perspective?
I would say so. Like I said, I digested a lot of true crime media at the time, just in my free time, and I was certainly more interested in the places that were of geographical proximity to me. So Maura's case was one that I was very interested in. That's how I learned about Tim and Lance, of course. Brianna's, I had learned about from that case, and I had watched the episode on Disappeared. And what was obvious right away was one case was getting more attention than the other. And of course, with what I was studying in school at the time, I was thinking about what about these victims are different, and what about these cases are different, so that one is getting this and one's getting that.
Can you expand on that a little bit? Because often it's said in true crime media that, and I think this is valid, and Kristin and I have talked about this on the air before, that, let's be frank here, pretty white women, young women, tend to get an awful lot of attention in true crime media. But here are two very attractive young women who go missing 90 miles apart, one in New Hampshire, one in Vermont, neither one of them major media centers. Why do you think Murray got more attention than Brianna Maitland?
I think Maura was portrayed as a more relatable victim, or a more clean-cut persona or archetype. Whether or not that's based in reality is only known by people who really knew them. But I can only speak to how they were portrayed. Maura had her, even though it wasn't really the case, she was portrayed as having a grieving fiance. They weren't even engaged, but in the media, he was her fiance, who was a soldier, and she was a track star. And her father was in the media talking about how she was this great student. She got a lot of sympathy, and she's deserving of that sympathy. Brianna, she had dropped out of high school. She was sleeping on people's couches, not living at home. And very quickly in her investigation, the police had made mention in the media that she was affiliated with the drug culture and had made poor life choices by affiliating with bad characters, basically trashing her character. And they ended up taking it back and apologizing because they weren't willing to put forth proof of any of it. So I think they're both beautiful young white women, and I think there's even a phenomenon, missing white woman syndrome, describe people caring more about those women. But Brianna had certain factors that made her gain less sympathy from the public and less attention.
So you feel like Maura was presented as the more of the all-American girl. Whether those cliches really are accurate or not is not the point.
It's just how they were portrayed. And yes, I do.
It's interesting. I'm going to make a comment here. I think both women made some terrible choices. I always say this with the caveat, I'm not victim blaming in any way, shape, or form. Like about my sister's case, the Colonial Parkway murders, I always emphasize that, look, there may have been some risky behaviors involved in stopping at a lover's lane or what have you. But then Kristin and I have talked about this. I think all of us as young people have done dopey things. But I do think in Maura and Brianna's cases, and I see them as independent events here, I think there were bad choices all around.
Yeah, and I certainly I'm glad that I never went missing, because one of many reasons why I'm glad I never went missing. When I was a teenager, imagine what kind of stuff would come out about you. We're lucky that we get to move on from those young adulthood and teenage years with some dignity without the entire world knowing what kind of mistakes you made. And I think that is exactly why Fred Murray, Maura's father, has been so protective of Maura's reputation. He didn't want certain things coming out, which ended up coming out. The information about her arrest for using stolen credit card numbers, that wasn't unearthed until James Renner found it. But the family knew about it, but they were not interested in having that come out because probably they were concerned about people caring about her less.
I think there's a lot of validity to that. And
I think so too.
And then Kristin, of course, you teach high school students. You see some of those life mistakes and bad choices being made. I don't know about so much now in when under a COVID lockdown, but when you're seeing students for an entire year, you certainly see and hear about plenty of mistakes that kids make. And as I said, we all made them. I'm just thankful that we didn't have the World Wide Web back when I was a kid.
Yeah, and for my students, they have no problem putting this stuff up online. A lot of them will share just about every facet of their life that they can on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever social media fad happens to be in vogue on this particular week or month. And yeah, I can't imagine how different it is now to be a teenager. Think of, we didn't have any of that when I was a teenager.
Chloe, you were going to say?
It's just in summary, one was portrayed as this engaged to be married superstar, future nurse, and the other one was described by the media as described by the police and the media as being associated with drug culture.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. Take us back to, how did you first learn about Brianna Maitland's disappearance?
I wouldn't be able to get the exact instance, but I would just have to guess that it was from researching Maura Murray's case, because it inevitably comes up.
And then which came first, your deep dive into the Brianna Maitland case or your work with Tim and Lance and the Crawl Space podcast series?
Oh, the deep dive.
Oh, so
for sure.
They became aware of you through your writing about Brianna's disappearance?
The blog that I've written came after the podcasting. So I became acquainted with Tim and Lance because I reached out to them personally with some of my thoughts and research after they had made a sort of call to action on one of their episodes of Missing Maura Murray. If anyone has any information that they think might be useful, let us know. I don't recall exactly what I had sent them, but that's what started our rapport. There was no like true crime club in my high school. I didn't know that this was like a thing. I just thought I was super weird and of course I was lucky to have my twin sister who also was into it and I would talk about it with, but it's been so nice to see this like huge community on Twitter and in the podcasting world of people that also will spend their own time researching it. But yeah, like when I was in high school, I had probably spent hours discussing theories about the case with my sister.
Well, and it is helpful to have a twin with some similar interests where the two of you could kick these things around.
Oh, yes. Yeah, for sure.
Kristin, what was that mean?
So are you still blogging about the case? We read through all of the blog posts, which are excellent. I've said it before, but I'll continue to say it. Are you planning on continuing with that blog, or have you said everything that you feel needs to be said?
When I started, I put myself on a schedule, and then I felt like I didn't want to do that anymore because it was forcing content. Then I had my first baby, so I put it on the back burner a little bit, but that's just me being honest. But I'm definitely not stepping away from it. I'm just not posting anything until I think there's something additional that's useful to be posted. I also just don't want to be posting for the sake of it. It needs to be, in my mind, there needs to be some sort of productive reason to post it.
That's understandable.
And as a father some years back, I will say this, that there's nothing like having a baby to completely absorb every minute of every day, at least for the first couple of years.
Yeah, it's definitely a time-consuming full-time job.
In addition to your full-time job.
Right, and podcasting, side hobby, blogging.
So actually, let's jump into that for a second. So your initial podcast experience then is at the beginning of Crawl Space. Is that correct?
Yes, that was my debut.
Now, I've seen some photographs recently, which I had not seen before, of Tim and Lance, and then you're in the middle with the three of them, and you're actually in the same physical space. You remember when we used to be able to meet in the same physical space?
I miss it.
Yeah, we do too. I saw photographs of the three of you. Now, are those at the Crawl Space Studios?
Yes.
And so you would go to Worcester and sit down with them in the commodious Crawl Space Studios and record podcasts there.
The studio, they started, I think, after a certain amount of time. When we first started, it was him recording Skype sessions, and I would use like Apple earbuds plugged into my laptop. Like it was not a sophisticated setup at all. The studio came later.
And it's funny, so much of what we're doing, including our communication with Tim and Lance, is remote now. Full disclosure here, I was banging my head against the wall this morning because we ran into some technical challenges. Kristin, Kristin has an expression, technology is not our friend, which sometimes fits. But you get through it. So you obviously recorded those sometimes face-to-face and sometimes using distance techniques.
Yeah.
And then when did you start your own podcast, True Crime Twins?
So that was about a year ago. Tim and Lance decided to expand and make different shows to produce, and they actually pitched it to us. And we were really excited because obviously that's like, for people like us, it's a dream come true to just have that kind of platform. And it's been awesome just talking about the cases that we find we can have the most enlightening discussions about. There's just so much coverage already. You try to be original. I'm sure you guys face this too when creating your own content. You don't want to just regurgitate what other people have done. So we try to choose cases where we can come from it from a unique perspective or approach where people maybe learn.
We both feel the same way. We try not to cover the cases that have been done to death, all puns intended. But for instance, we were planning on covering the Brianna Maitland disappearance for several months. And we're always mapping out. Kristin's super organized. She's okay, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And so we were mapping out like who we want to talk about, where do we want to go, that kind of thing. And then our friends, Billy Jensen and Paul Holes, covered the Brianna Maitland case 2 or 3 weeks ago. And we didn't know that they were going to cover the case. They did a great job. They did a one-off. And they were also incredibly generous. At the end of that broadcast, they mentioned that they were going to be contributing an additional $2,500 to help cover the costs of Othram Labs in Texas DNA testing, which is currently being conducted on behalf of the Vermont State Police. We had no way of knowing that Billy and Paul, who were pretty prominent guys and both real pioneers in true crime, we didn't know they were going to be covering the same case a week before we launched a new exploration. It's funny, we had reached out to Tim and Lance from Crawlspace and Missing Maura Murray to ask them if they had any issue with us covering Brianna's case. And if anything, they were incredibly encouraging. They said, no, you should absolutely do it. And you should talk to this person and that person. And there's so much interesting material to cover that to try to help bring our listeners up to speed. We were very encouraged by that. I do agree with your initial point that Brianna Maitland's case has been less explored than it should have been. And there are cases that we can all name where you hear about them just ad infinitum and you're thinking, gosh, haven't we covered that one? Versus Brianna Maitland's case, there's still opportunities to explore this and hopefully move the case forward.
Absolutely. And it's nice to try to be a part of that, being that change and saying, oh, we'll cover it. We have a platform. Let's do it. She deserves it.
Yeah, she really does.
And her family does too.
Let's dive into this a little bit. How has your attitude about the Brianna Maitland case changed as you've learned more about the case?
That's like a big question. In countless ways. Yeah, in countless ways. Just because it's so ruled by rumor, and I hate to say ruled, but from what is easily accessible online, a lot of that information is unreliable. So I went in with a lot of assumptions and rumor-based untruths that turned out to be false. And that's why it was really important early on to talk to Bruce Maitland, her father, and to talk to Greg Overacker and Lou Berry, the private investigators, because they're the ones that have actually talked to people that have actually seen records and gone through it. So they know what's true and what just bull.
Can you give us some examples of the kind of thing where you think the ruled by rumor is an interesting expression? What do you mean?
So here's a perfect example. And I have a blog post dedicated to this. It was featured on the Disappeared episode. The story where on the afternoon of Brianna's disappearance, she went shopping with her mother for a pair of black pants because she was starting another job as a waitress the next day, which of course she never showed up for, but she needed black pants. She, at one point during the shopping trip, said, I need to, or I'll be right back. And she walks outside. And the mother said that Brianna's mood had changed and she was a little bit agitated and rushing to get back once they had met back outside. So on the Disappeared episode, they emphasized that Brianna was agitated and made it seem like there was something important there. And then we had people on Crawlspace saying, oh, there was a story that someone warned her when she was outside, that maybe she saw them through the window and went out and spoke to them and they warned her not to go to work. And that's what had her shaken up. And it's the same day. So it's like, oh, okay, that sounds like it could be true. And then eventually I start seeing online that people are saying as if it's fact that she's been warned at work, that it's a fact that she was warned at work that day. And it's just not the case. So I actually subscribe to it. Like everybody, not like everybody, but like a lot of people just was like, oh, okay, I guess that's what happened. But then when you talk about it with Lou, he said there's a much simpler explanation to what changed her mood. Here's one. She's a 17-year-old girl being rude to her mom. And I love my mom, but I was rude to her when I was 17, especially if I was rushed or if I was concerned I was going to be late for something. Brianna also smoked cigarettes and hid it from her mom. So she was with her mother all day. She woke up, took her GED exam. They went out for breakfast and they went out shopping. Anyone that smoked cigarettes would know she was probably craving a cigarette and going outside probably was having one. I think there were a lot of reasons for her to be agitated that are a more simple explanation than this person warned her based on one third-party story, which has been proven to be unreliable.
And when Brianna supposedly goes outside when shopping for her mother, this is after passing the GED, which is already a pretty full day. Is Brianna supposedly using a cell phone?
According to everybody, Brianna didn't have a cell phone.
That's what I'm saying. So reviewing your material regarding the disappearance of Brianna Maitland, which is obviously later that same day, what exactly is Brianna supposed to be doing outside? If she isn't taking a phone call on a cell phone, I think she's sneaking a cigarette. I think
that makes the most sense, given what we know.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder.
And I really like the fact that in one of the later blog posts, you took the time to disabuse people of that notion that it's very likely that she was out having a cigarette as opposed to being warned away from work. I like the fact that you took the time and that Greg Overacker also took the time to write a guest post where he discussed those concepts. Because in a case like this that is, as you so nicely said, ruled by rumor, people do sometimes need a reminder that, okay, let's really look at what is probably true and let's look at what sounds maybe a little bit overdramatic and probably not is the case. That Greg actually brings up the concept of Occam's razor. When you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. And I like that concept. You've got a 17-year-old girl. She's a smoker. She's probably having a cigarette. It's unlikely that somebody is warning her away from going to work. At least that's how I feel about it. So I like the fact that you addressed that, and so did Greg.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying, who knows? Maybe we'll find out after everything that it did. But we don't know that it did. And maybe to some seems like picking apart minute details. But if someone's warning her at work, obviously they have more information about what ended up happening to her that night. So it's actually a really important detail, and it's important to verify it and make sure that we're not just spreading it around when it's based on speculation.
No, I think that's a more than valid point. Studying what happened to Brianna that day is the last time we have any reasonably reliable chronology of what happened. Kristin and I are delving into the case and reading and watching and listening to other people's podcasts, which, by the way, we don't normally do that when we're taking a look at a case. But in this case, we were encouraged by other podcasters like yourself to do that. And we've taken that step, which is a little bit outside our usual MO, if you will. The truth is, studying what happened prior to Brianna's disappearance, before we get into the swirl of just insane rumors, is probably the only place where we've still got reliable information.
Well, it's sad to say, but stemming off of what you just said, when you think about what we actually know, it's nothing. Like when you just tune out all of the noise of the speculation, what we actually know is what we just talked about, what she did that day, taking the test, going out for breakfast, going shopping, going to work, leaving work. That's it. And then the car being found. That's all in the end. That's all we really know. It's sad, but it's as simple as that.
What are some of the other absurd rumors that you think we all ought to be putting aside when it comes to the Brianna Maitland disappearance?
There's a lot. And I don't know, because we don't know what happened in the end. I can't say what's true or what isn't true, but I guess what's important to not assume is true, a couple of things. Let's think about that. I know at least with local rumors, there was immediate talk that she was tied to a tree in the woods. That was like the big thing, and I don't know if that's still a belief, but I think the rumors all have the same themes, but they're all convoluted in their own ways through the osmosis of broken telephone. It's all the same idea of accidental overdose, body disposal on a farm. Some variations of the story are intentional abduction. It's all kind of
accidental.
ending with, it all has to do with overdose, though. Either she was stuck with a needle, or she overdosed accidentally and they covered it up, or she was kidnapped and they were keeping her high to keep her complacent.
Right.
There's so many rumors, and they all end with her overdosing and her being disposed on some sort of farm.
Right.
Frequently, it's a pig farm.
And I would add too, and again, we're not as expert as you are, I would add a couple of additional details. In other words, we've heard 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe more versions, not directly, but through the investigators and other people that are much more expert on the case than we are. I'd add a couple more details. They seem to be kidnapped, held by people that she knew, men involved, although I think women could clearly be involved. She's somehow, in these crazy rumors, is held by these people. She may be given drugs, and then everything always seems to end with an accidental overdose, and then a decision by this group of people who are supposedly her friends to dispose of her body. It all seems to center around it. When I initially began studying the case, I began thinking of the groups of suspects as being in separate buckets. But the more we listen and learn about the case, I don't know, the buckets start to feel more and more blended. It all seems to center around a group of people. And I find it highly disturbing that some or all of these people know what really happened to Brianna Maitland and still, all these years later, refuse to step forward and say what happened to someone that they claim was their friend.
They weren't her friends. That's the truth. They weren't her friends. If she'd had a couple of true friends, I think a lot of the people that she was associating with were not actual friends to her.
No, because your friends stick up for you when the chips are down, and whatever cliche you want to go with here. And it sure doesn't sound like any of that happened. But I feel like there are people that still have ties to or live near Montgomery, Vermont, that know what happened to Brianna Maitland and have failed to step forward. And I find that horrifying.
It's horrifying, and I think the only conditions that would make that possible is if those people lacked conscience or remorse to be able to just sleep at night and go on each day and live with themselves. And I would even suggest that the people who do know are the ones that are responsible for the rumors that are out there. They probably disseminated the rumors themselves to convolute things. I don't know if I should give them that much credit intelligence-wise, but I don't think you have to be that smart to start a rumor.
No, or take some variation of what may have been a kernel of truth and then put some bizarre spin on it.
And conveniently taking yourself out of it.
Agreed. Although sometimes I feel that in some of the stories we've heard, people seem to want to insert themselves into the process, but of course, in a way that holds themselves as blameless. They were there, or that's the corner of my father's house where Brianna Maitland was killed, which could be true, by the way. And then it's this farm or that farm or this farm where her body was disposed. And we tried hard not to get too graphic on Mind Over Murder, but this is where this portion of her body was hidden, and here's where the rest of her body, just horrible stuff. A lot of people seem to be, in a perverse way, taking pride in the fact that they know what really happened to Brianna Maitland. But of course, they had nothing to do with it directly.
Yeah, probably. I think that is probably true for a lot of, I wouldn't say fugitives, but people that haven't been caught yet. They probably do feel powerful by having this elusive knowledge and get off on it, maybe.
I think you could be right.
What is your current theory about Brianna's disappearance? I think we all have our own theories, but of course we're very interested in yours because you have been working with this for quite a while now. What's your current theory?
I have a couple. I try not to subscribe to one because I don't want to fall into the dangers of confirmation bias, which I also talk about on the blog, which we're all susceptible to, but I think most susceptible to when we cling on to one theory because we just want it to be true. And then everything that supports it is perfect and everything that goes against it is not. But I would think at this point, based on everything that we know, I think it is possible that it was a stranger. That's one theory, that it was someone that was stalking her, someone that had become interested in her after maybe patronizing the Black Lantern Inn. She was a beautiful, lively young lady, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that she had a stalker, and it could have been a stranger or it could have been someone that she knew, someone that was familiar with her work schedule, and then either had, I don't want to get too detailed just because it's also speculative, but when you get down to the details and you think about what actually happened, either she had a planned rendezvous with someone at that abandoned house on her way home. She saw someone saw someone or something involuntarily stopped at first, or she was ran off the road or something. So I think when you're thinking about what's likely and what's not, I think it's possible, but less likely that some stalker was like, okay, this is the time that she normally comes home from work. This is the time, or this is the route that she normally takes. I'm going to pull over here and flag her down because she'll stop because she's nice or because she recognizes me or something. I think that's possible. I think it's a little much. I don't know what you guys think.
Well, wasn't her schedule in flux? In other words, wasn't the dishwashing job at the Black Lantern Inn a new job? So her schedule would have been changing right around the time that she disappeared.
Yes, and she didn't have a set quitting time. She left when the kitchen was clean. So that could be quite variable. So even in that note that she left for her roommate, I don't even think she put in a specific time she'd be home. She might have said after this time or around this time, because even she didn't know when she'd be getting off. So that kind of made it hard for her to plan a meeting ahead of time when she didn't know what time she'd be getting off. She didn't have a cell phone, and the phone records at the Black Lantern Inn have apparently been examined, and they didn't find anything suspicious. So I am less inclined to think that it was something planned unless she had some kind of chance encounter. I know I'm rambling here. It's so complicated, all of the factors. To simplify, it was either a stranger who stalked her and had this masterful plan to lure her to the side of the road, or maybe she met someone there and however it was planned, it wasn't by electronic means. Maybe she saw them during her shift or saw them earlier in the day. She didn't feel the need to share those plans with Jillian, her roommate, or any of her other friends if they existed. Or it could have been a chance encounter. Maybe someone recognized her car. It was a small area. Weirder things have happened. They were pissed at her and they wanted to talk to her right then and ran her off the road. I don't know if there was never any kind of accident reconstruction work done before the vehicle was towed, but I don't know if the damage of the vehicle or the position of the vehicle would necessarily support that. I think that's also a possibility.
From looking at the photographs, it sure doesn't feel like she was run off the road.
I don't think so either. I think it's possible, but when I look at that picture, I think more likely she had voluntarily stopped, had pulled in, backed in at that angle, and then was trying to escape, but was in a state of heightened adrenaline and accidentally went into reverse instead of drive.
I think it's more likely because the position of this gigantic Oldsmobile backed up at this awkward angle, smashing into the Dutchburn house, which is gone now, unfortunately, to the point where it almost looks like the rear of the chassis is up onto the foundation of the old boarded up home. It almost looks like the rear wheels, the angle that you see most of the time is from the road, so you can see the right side of the car with the front wheels turned at an odd angle. It almost looks like the drive wheel, which would be the right rear wheel on that old Oldsmobile four-door, it almost looks like it might not have been able to move forward because it almost looks like that wheel is off the ground.
Once she was backed in, she wouldn't have been able to get out by going into drive.
And she's hit the house. I'm assuming for a second that she's driving. It appears that whoever's operating the vehicle, let's assume that it's Brianna, has hit the house hard enough to have a board from, it looks like one of the boarded up windows, fall onto the car itself. So she's smacked the house at a pretty good clip in reverse. I think you're right, Chloe. I don't think she's able to move forward then. So it doesn't feel like a situation where she'd been driven off the road or anything like that. It does feel more like she's accidentally, I would guess, put the car in reverse while trying to get out of a situation that she regards as upsetting or threatening or something like that. And remember, she's not a terribly experienced driver. She's only 17. She's only had her license for, I'm going to guess, a year and a half. She's driving this big boat of a car that she's inherited from her grandmother, if I'm not mistaken. It's not an easy car to drive to begin with.
No, I can't imagine operating that thing. But yeah, I think I think it's not out of the realm of possibility that an inexperienced, scared driver would have made a mistake like that when trying to get away. I mean, maybe she was pushed off the road and then tried to get away. That's also possible. I'm not an accident reconstructionist, so it's just pure speculation what I'm saying about my opinion of how the car looked.
And then, of course, one alternate theory, while we're on the car for a moment, is that Dutchburn House is a dump site. In other words, whatever has transpired with Brianna and her assailants, let's call them that, I think that's fair. Perhaps these people, after taking Brianna away, have then returned to the Dutchburn House, which is out on its own, with fields and light snow in the photographs that we can see, and then dumped the car there. And maybe they made the decision to back the car up sharply and smack it into the boarded up house. There are odd details that jump out for me, though. For example, the lime on the trunk of the car and the money, a small amount of coins on the ground, and her broken necklace. These kind of seem to imply a struggle or an attempt on Brianna's part to get away from the people or the vehicle. Those items found outside the car, I think, are very striking.
Yes, plus the fact that even though it's not pictured this way, headlights and possibly a blinker were left flashing, and her driver and passenger side doors were left wide open. This was interfered with before those photographs were taken the next day.
And this is the late James Robitelli, whose ever-changing story of what happened that evening in different versions has him and his friend Mike Stebbins coming by and supposedly closing the doors and turning off the headlights of the Oldsmobile.
I don't know if I've heard the version where Mike Stebbins accompanied him on that trip.
I could be wrong about that.
But what I understand is that his most recent story was, the first story was that he just saw it driving back home from Canada. And then he said, I never was in Canada. He was with Mike Stebbins. And then when he's driving home, sees the car, stops, gets out, turns the headlights off, closes the door, doesn't call the police because he's high and doesn't want to get in trouble, and doesn't say anything until I don't know when.
Although our discussions with our two private investigators, both Lou Barry and Greg Overacker, clearly indicate that the Robitelli version of the story with him returning from Canada, which was a much more lightly patrolled crossing than it would be now, that version of the story is not true. And that
correct, yeah.
Robitelli and whoever he was partying with that night, they were smoking crack and drinking, that they clearly did not cross into Canada. And despite the fact that people are on social media as we speak, insisting that they have been told by Vermont state troopers that there is video showing Robitelli and others crossing over from Canada, apparently that is not true.
They must be special that Vermont State Police is sharing such private information that no one has seen. Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds true.
It's funny. I've been following social media a bit more on the case, and there's a guy now who's absolutely insisting that we're going down the wrong road. And as I explained, I didn't say James Robitelli killed Brianna Maitland, and I believe we are talking about a murder at this point. I never said that. He got all his knickers in a twist because someone asked if Robitelli had died, and I posted a link to an article without comment that indicated that Robitelli had died in 2019 in an automobile accident, which was clearly his fault. He killed another motorist while passing on a hill, and he smashed head on into another motorist's car. That motorist died, and then Robitelli, and I'm not taking any pleasure in saying this, Robitelli burned to death in his own vehicle, which is, the whole thing is very sad. This guy jumped on me because I posted an article that says local man dies in fiery crash. I didn't write the article. I didn't write the headline. I was just answering the question, which was basically, I heard that James Robitelli has died. And this guy immediately starts defending Robitelli. And I said, all I did was answer the question about whether or not James Robitelli had passed away with this article. And I said, I didn't even comment. And I didn't say he was a murderer or anything like that. It's funny. So there are people on social media as we speak insisting that everybody's got it wrong and they know what really happened, which I find fascinating.
Yeah, I've been through it firsthand, and I used to engage because I really don't like seeing falsehoods being spread. It's incredibly frustrating when someone's, no, I know this for a fact. This person told me that's not true. But you can't really say anything. It's just frustrating.
And as you said, that game of broken telephone, just around and around.
Yeah, and they're just like, they've fallen victim to the simplest logical fallacies where they think that something is fact because they overheard someone say it in the grocery store.
Right.
They just don't understand.
Join us again next time as we continue our conversation with Chloe Canter discussing the disappearance of Brianna Maitland. Thanks for listening.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.